We're going to continue our discussion of how to write papers for machine learning and natural language processing, but today we're not going to talk about writing per se. We're going to talk about what happens after you finish writing. What happens when you submit your paper to a conference or to a journal and reviewers in your field decide whether it should be published or not. And even though it's not writing per se, keeping these factors in mind as you're writing can lead to a better paper with a higher probability of acceptance at the kind of venues that you want your paper to be accepted at. And oftentimes this is viewed as an adversarial process, that the reviewing process is trying to find ways for your paper to be rejected, and it's a painful, soul-crushing experience. And it can be that. I won't lie about that, but it's really exposing your paper to the first readers. These are people chosen by experts in your field who can decide whether your paper is good or not. And because you want to write for your readers, it's important to write for these very first readers of your paper and to make sure that they can understand what your paper is about so that they can write a fair and thorough review. So understanding this process will help you do a better job of writing a good paper and getting through the review process. And for yourself, learning how to write a good paper and be a good reviewer is an important part of academia. Like much of academia, the reviewing process is hierarchical, and so we're going to talk a little bit about the hierarchy of how papers get reviewed for a conference. It's a little different for journals, but many of the same concepts apply. So for journals, you have editors, action editors, and individual reviewers, all of the same concepts that you see in conferences. But because we're in computer science, we're going to talk more about conferences. At a conference, you typically have, at the very top, a set of program chairs. And so these are the people who are in charge of the entire program, the list of accepted papers that this conference will have. And then they will divide the conference into areas. And so these areas are areas of expertise, something like language models or topic models or parsing, areas of a conference where experts can judge whether this set of papers is good or not. And then each of those areas will have a bunch of reviewers. And those reviewers will decide for every given paper whether it should be accepted or not. They will write a review. That's why they're called reviewers. At very large conferences like ICML, you'll have another layer in between. So instead of just having area chairs, you often have senior area chairs below them, and those area chairs interacting with reviewers. So this adds another layer to the hierarchy. And in many cases, the hierarchy also expands below, so that instead of just having individual reviewers looking at a paper, those reviewers may call in assistant reviewers. And for example, I may review at a conference, and I may see a paper very much related to something that my student is working on. I will give that student the paper and ask them to be an assistant reviewer, and both of our names will go on the resulting review. So one question you might ask is, how do these people get selected? The area chairs are selected by hand by the program chairs, and those area chairs go out and look for people who have published in this area before, people who have reviewed in this area before, and they'll also look for senior students who have published a couple of papers and are ready to start reviewing on their own. This is not an obligation. You will be asked, do you want to review for this conference? And the entire scientific process depends on reviewers saying yes. And there are a lot of commitments out there, but reviewing is an important part of being a supportive and contributing member of the scientific community. So you have to say yes, but only say yes if you can actually do the job. So the worst part of being an area chair is having a bunch of reviews come in late or come in with only a couple of words. And these are really disruptive to the process. I'm sure that you as authors would hate it if you were expecting to get 3 reviews and you got 1 good review and then one-liner review and then a missing 3rd review. And that means that your paper wasn't given the fair treatment that it deserved. So do unto others as you would have them do unto them. If you sign up to be a reviewer, do a good job and do the sorts of things that we'll talk about today. One important part of being selected as a reviewer is having a web page. So it's good in general in academia to have a web page that lists the projects that you're working on in your publications, but specifically for finding reviewers, having a web page will help reviewers know if you're ready to review or not. And if you want to be part of the reviewing process, have a web page that shows that you have the skills that it takes to do a good job reviewing. When we talked about writing, we talked about the different kinds of audiences that you write for, and this is also true when you write a review. When you write a review, you're writing not just for the authors, but also for the area chair and other reviewers. And so think about the things that you have to do in this process to make sure that your review is well written for each of these audiences. So first, be nice to the authors. And we talked about how reviewing can sometimes be a soul-crushing process when you have submitted your life's work to a conference or a journal and you get back a scathing review. So don't be that person. Write a nice review, and one very simple way of doing that is talk about the paper, don't talk about the author. I saw one particularly bad review that said something like, the authors have wasted our time by submitting a half-baked idea, and these are likely junior students who are having their first brush with academia, and that's not a good way to introduce them to the scientific community. Be constructive. Reviews are a chance for papers to become better, and so even if a paper is certain to be rejected, tell the authors what they can do to make the paper better. So don't just say, the evaluation sucks. Say, the evaluation would be stronger if you did experiments A, B, and C, and then they can do those experiments and have a better paper. If you just say the experiments suck, you'll get the same paper back that you saw last time, maybe with 10 times as many bad experiments. So it saves trouble for both you as a reviewer and trouble for the authors. You should also be concrete. And so if you are going to give a suggestion or give a criticism, make sure that it's backed up by facts. So don't just say, this has been done before. Explicitly say the paper that did it. If you're saying, you should have used a data set that has properties A, B, and C, make sure that that data set actually exists and say what that data set is. Maybe you have information that the authors don't have, or maybe you're remembering it wrong. If you have a criticism, be concrete in your criticism so that the author can either learn from it, or if you're wrong and reviewers are often wrong, they can rebut it. But if you're vague, it doesn't really help anybody. So you're writing to the authors to help them improve their paper, but the point of reviewing is to decide whether this paper is getting accepted to the conference or not. And the person making that decision is the area chair. So you also need to write for the area chair. And it's important to keep in mind that the area chair is looking at lots and lots of papers, dozens, maybe even 100 papers, and they need to decide which of these papers get in and which of these papers are going to get rejected. So make the area chair's life easier, and your reviews will be treated with greater respect, and you will gain a better reputation in the community. So first off, be self-contained. Because the area chair is reading lots and lots of reviews, things get confused, and they don't always remember every detail of a paper, so make it so that they can read your review and it stands on its own. Don't refer to other reviewers without fully explaining what's going on. Don't refer to section numbers in the paper. Be concrete and specific enough that the area chair can read your review and understand what's going on. Don't make it so that they have to open up 2 tabs with your review and the paper side by side to understand what you're saying. And along with this, be detailed. So the area chair is an expert in the field, and if you tell them what's going on in the paper, they can have a much better idea of whether this paper should be accepted or not. So don't just say that the equations aren't justified, talk about the specific problem. And these people are experts, they're smart, they'll be able to understand what you're saying, and they'll be able to use that information to make an informed decision. But if you just say the equations aren't justified, they need to spend more time to go into the paper, read through the paper. Maybe they can't see the problem that you're seeing, they don't have enough time to do it. Use your time and your energy that you put into reading the paper so that the area chair can make an informed decision. and if there's a critical problem with the paper, they can find it immediately and judge how big of an issue it actually is. And be thorough. So because the area chair has hundreds or at least dozens of papers to look through, they can't find all of the problems that you can find. So if there's an issue, it's your job to find it. It's your job to raise it. So look to see if there's work that hasn't been cited. Look to see if there are issues in the derivation or in the proofs. And if so, raise those issues and explore all of the places where there could be a problem in the paper. Even if you don't find a problem, that's important information too. Say, I thoroughly checked the proofs and everything checks out as far as I can tell. That's very useful. And many times people only mention where there's a problem, but it's very useful for the area chair to know that someone that they respect and trust has checked an important part of the paper and found it to be just fine. And so that's important information for the area chair to have as well. At many conferences, another important audience for your reviews are the other reviewers. If you get to see the other reviews, engage with them. And the area chair needs to take all the reviews for a paper and make a final decision. If one reviewer says that this model has problems X, Y, and Z, and you disagree with that, you need to say in your review that those aren't problems, that those are good things. And this can happen through the discussion, but it needs to get formalized inside the review. Oftentimes, after the reviews go out, there will be some email discussion and you'll talk about the paper, and you may reach some decisions, but that needs to get memorialized somehow. Sometimes the area chair will write a meta-review explaining the details, but it's your responsibility to express your thoughts in your reviews. And so you have, in many cases, the option of editing your reviews. So edit your reviews to reflect the discussion that you had with the other reviewers. And this is another opportunity for you to be constructive and informative and detailed in a way that can help the authors. And this helps the area chair make a better decision if they can see all of the discussion reflected in the reviews in a nice formal way that doesn't always come across in reading through the emails. And implicit in all of this is that you have to actually engage in the discussion. Don't consider your job done when you submit the reviews and then forget about them. And again, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Once you submit a review, if there is feedback from the authors or from other reviewers or the area chair, that should be reflected in your review. And that will go to the authors and they'll be able to improve the paper with that feedback. So even though you as a reviewer will make a recommendation, should this paper be accepted or should it be rejected, that's not the end of the story. Your recommendations flow up. And so the area chair will read through all the reviews and then they'll make a recommendation. And then the area chair will usually give a sorted list to the program chair, and then the program chair will decide these are the papers from each area that we'll accept. And different areas have different levels of strength, so from the ranked list that each area chair provides, the program chair will decide where the accept line is and where the reject line is. So think about how you can help the area chair do a good job of recommending a paper for acceptance or rejection. So the best thing possible is for your review to be both decisive and detailed. So say, I believe that this paper should get accepted and here's why. Or I think this paper should get rejected and here's why. Second best is for you to be ambivalent in your decision, but detailed in your review. And you may not have the experience to say whether it's more important to have a good problem setup and a faulty evaluation, or vice versa. You're not comfortable making that decision. But if you lay out the pros and cons of the paper, that's something that an area chair can work with to come to a decision. And so they have the information that they need, and they can be the decisive one. But it's bad if your review is sparse on details. And so even if you're decisive and say this is a great paper, and that's all you say in your review, the area chair can't do much with that because they'll need to make an argument and they'll need to reconcile your review with the other reviewers. And so if there were other negative reviews that were far more detailed, your review isn't going to count for much. And the authors aren't going to get much out of that. And similarly, if you're ambivalent and you have a very sparse review, your review will get ignored for good reason. You don't say what you think, and you don't explain why you thought that. So if you want to be a valued reviewer, make sure that your reviews are detailed so that the area chair can make a decision. Even if you can't make a decision, it's important for you to give the tools for the area chair to make that decision. So even if you never review, it's useful to think about what happens when a paper gets reviewed. And this will help you as you're writing. So you can think about, if I were reviewing this paper, why would I reject this paper? We talked about this before in modeling the reader who is lazy but experienced, and as you think about the process for how papers get accepted into a conference, this will help you write a stronger paper that's more immune to the kinds of things that can go wrong during the reviewing process. And think about the specific people who might be reading this paper. If you're building on an existing paper, the area chair may well assign the people who worked on that paper to review it. So talk about those papers in collegial scientific ways. And think about the other people who work in this area. Have you cited them? Have you explained how your work is different? If there are related papers who do similar things, those are likely to be your reviewers, and they understand their system, so if you cite their paper and explain why your system is different, that will help them do a better job of reviewing the paper. Think about how you would explain it to them if you saw them at the later conference, and that's the kind of thing that should go into the paper. The same way that you would explain it to them in person is how you should explain it to them in your paper. And because your paper will be reviewed in a pool of other papers, think about the other papers that are likely to be submitted to this conference. What about your paper is special or unique? And if you're submitting yet another data set that does question answering, what about your paper this year is going to be unique and set it apart from everything else? The bottom line is that the scientific community is a community, and it's full of individual people who are reviewers, writers, area chairs, program chairs. They're all human, they all make mistakes, but science is a process of communication and everyone trying to get to a better degree of understanding. And the more effective you are at writing and reviewing, the more successful you'll be in science, and the faster that we as a community understand the difficult problems and challenges that our field faces.